So without further ado, that's me. I'm going to invite up Kimberly Abbott, who is the founder of Vested Impact. Sophia Ukor, who we've already heard, is the founder of Violet Simon. Styliana Minkowska, who is the founder of Matrix, and Matilda Strom, the founder of Carbon Pool, but also others. So I'm starting at the end with you, Kim, and I will have you just tell us who you are and tell us give a couple minutes about Vested Impact.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Kim Abbott. I'm the CEO and founder of Vested Impact. I'm Australian by background, if my accent doesn't give me away. I'm also an engineer, and my previous experience was actually, I used to work for the United Nations, where my job was to lead the technical development for them of the data platforms to assess and monitor the impact of their $8 billion peacekeeping operations. And it was through doing that, which was how I created Vested Impact. So we're a tech company, a fintech, and we're a data platform that automatically assesses and quantifies the outward impact that companies have. So different to ESG, which tends to look at, does a company behave well? We assess what is the impacts they actually have on everything from inequalities, food security, the ocean, you name it. We work with everyone from the UN through to financial institutions, but also last year we received some money from MasterCard to help make our technology available to SMEs, to help everyone build better businesses for society and for doing good business.
Thank you, Kim. Sophia.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Sophia Ufi Ukor. I am the founder and CEO of Violet Simon. It's a media company that amplifies the experiences and the voices of women from all walks of lives using storytelling. And we do that to inspire women, to inform, to also create a safe space where women's voices are heard, and to push for more inclusive representation and equality. And I don't know if anyone is ever familiar about the stats that 0.5% of recorded history is about women's stories, so we're passionate about closing that gap. And one of our flagship products is Disruptors, which Vanessa talked about, and it's about amplifying the voices and the experiences of women who are challenging the status quo to create positive impact and reclaiming that word disruptors, because women are often labeled as troublemakers and noisemakers and whatnot, and even disruptors in a negative way. Women have been kicked out of organizations because they've been disruptive. And so we are using disruptors as a way to amplify the journeys and experiences of women who have disrupted and tell women it's okay to disrupt, keep disrupting and creating positive impact for yourselves. And I have a background, I've been an entrepreneur for 15 years. I have a background in English, in fashion, in PR and law, and professionally qualified as an international arbitrator. I'm also a volunteer delegate for the United Nations Women. And that's a summary of me in a nutshell.
That's fantastic, thank you. Matilda.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So my name is Matilda Strom. I'm originally from Sweden, mother of two. I find that a very important introductory part of my business. And I'm also a second-time disruptive business entrepreneur. I spent 12 years building a company called Bima that was or is providing insurance and telemedicine services to low and middle income families in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So grew that to 5.5 million people now paying for and getting access to life and health insurance and doctors for the first time across 7 countries in those regions. We had Allianz as a big investor, so grew it to about $300 million valuation. And I had an exit last year and decided to continue on an entrepreneurship journey, and now I'm part of the founding team of Carbon Pool, which is going to be another disruptive business in the climate space using sort of insurance and a new concept for insurance getting the first underwriting license that has carbon credits as a balance sheet, which basically means we're able to pay out in tons of carbon in case carbon projects fail to deliver or there's some event which means that the carbon is re-released into the atmosphere. A little more complex topic for those of you who don't know the climate space, but I'm happy for you to come up and talk to me afterwards about it. But we're hoping to really build a kind of billion-dollar business in insurance and really accelerate investments in carbon projects.
That's great. Thank you, Matilda. And last but not least, this is like a panel full of women changing the world, so I feel very lucky up here. Stiliana is also one of those changing the world, so tell us about your company.
And thank you, Kristen. Hello, my name is Stiliana Minkowska, and I'm the founder of Matrix. And Matrix is transforming gynecological protocols through women-led innovation. I always introduce myself as an unconventional founder, but I loved Matilda's introduction. For me, it's also important that I'm a mother of 2.5, because my personal experience really led me to where I am and sat here in front of you today. I'm an architect. I'm a fully qualified architect. Took me 9 years to get there, but I'm doing something in gynecology. Somebody asked me earlier in the networking space, oh, so you're an architect and a gynecologist? No, just an architect for now. When I was studying, my dream was to study at the Royal College of Art, which is the best design university in the world. I fell unexpectedly pregnant with my first daughter, and just I guess it didn't change so much as a person. I think I really managed to retain myself and who I am, truly. But it changed me as a designer. I started navigating through the health and care spaces and kept thinking, why have we designed environments, products, interactions, and services that can equally make and break women's bodies? And my pregnancy and the childbirth experiences really kind of led to this series of events. With my first daughter, I had my master's. With my second daughter, I did another master's in healthcare and design, and that's where my company was born. And really, Matrix mission is to, what it does series of gynecological devices for pelvic floor examinations and diagnosis. And our first flagship offering is a digital replacement of the speculum, which is a smart device enabled with an optical capability, as well as it can take in situ biopsy and a sample. So you can potentially self-administer it, so the patient can fully control the experience, because we witness such massive dropout rates in women who avoid some of their life-saving assessments and procedures. But really, our vision is to bridge the gender health care gap, and especially health inequalities in areas where women can be empowered through the power of telemedicine and the skilled workforce. And yes, I'm on the hardest journey so far of fundraising. Last week, I compared it to childbirth. I think childbirth is easier. You can somehow control it, but yeah.
Thank you, Stiliana. Thank you, everyone. So we have a lot to discuss in a short amount of time, and one of the things about this event today is the opportunity to network and build a community of others who might be able to help you on your journey or just commiserate. And so I wanted to ask each of you how you have found the network to help you with your business, including financing your business, and how have you connected to the right people but also gotten a seat at the table so that you're kind of an equal partner in those types of discussions. I wanted you to also talk about what you think the primary challenges are that women face when trying to network and join other entrepreneurial networks and communities. So take any piece of, these questions are loaded, so take any piece that you hope to, that you could feel like you can answer, and I don't know if anybody particularly wants to start. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think fundamentally, I mean, there's no doubt that no business survives without a network. It's how you build the relationships, how you build the customers, and all those things. I'm going to pick up on the challenge part. I'm an engineer. We're inherently pretty introverted and quiet thinkers. And also, I started a company in a sector that sells to a sector that was not my own. So I came from the development space and the engineering space, and we were basically trying to sell to financial institutions. So I didn't have an active and instant network. It took a lot of work and a lot of good people who would invite you in, sponsor you, I think is the best word I can say. It's not mentoring, it's sponsorship, to kind of say, hey, you know, come to this event, I can get you in. So I think some of the challenges I found was simply having to build that and to find the people. And if you are a person that has access to networks, please open them up and open them wider. I think often with events, it might be a fintech event and we just advertise, you know, to the banks or in that sector. Go broader. It's about wider inclusion. But I think the other challenge was that first one I'll pick up on is I did learn that the way I best made relationships and network wasn't necessarily in a room like this. And I think that's okay. We don't all thrive in these big events. And I think for me, it was finding, you know, the one or two people that then I could follow up with for a coffee or something, or having, I think the network comes kind of in an exponential effect for the mathematics people of us. If you find one person, they'll then link you to two, who'll link you to three. And I found that was probably a challenge, and it took a long time to grow the network, but it was what worked best for me in that sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And there is a bit of, I think, serendipity, you know, it happening to meet the right person who then introduces you to the right person who, you know, whatever. Sophia, did you have?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much similar to what you said in terms of, I'll talk about how I found the network, you know, who have connected to the right people. And I think, first of all, I'll start by saying being an entrepreneur, moving countries to a different country is incredibly hard. And as an entrepreneur, it's maybe 10 times harder. So I didn't grow up in the UK. I was born and bred in Nigeria. Well, yeah, moved around a lot, but I was, you know, I'm Nigerian. And so when I moved into UK a few years, about 10 years ago now, over 10 years ago, thereabout, it was very hard. And it was also a culture shock, you know, because the culture is different, the community is different. Things were easier for me then. And then I come in here, the way everyone, no offense to British people. But yeah, it's very, you know, tight and more difficult, honestly. And so it was a culture shock for me. And then I had to find a way to get in. And so it was by going to events, you know, seeking people, following up with emails, getting to being told no or being ignored, but being persistent. So if someone says no, for example, or doesn't even respond to my email, I'll go to an event, because if I know, okay, this person, I definitely need to get your attention, because I feel like if you're in my corner, things would pick up a lot faster. So I would chase up to another event, go for that event, and keep talking about what I'm doing and, you know, how I want to connect with you, and talking about more, pitching myself basically, until I get told yes, okay, you can come along, and things like that. And like you also mentioned, it just takes one person to believe in you and believe in that thing you're doing. And it took me years for me to actually find that one person that believed in me enough to say, you know what, this is something so incredible. I want to introduce you to this person, and then that then creates a ripple effect, and that person introduces you to that person, and that person introduces you to that person. But it was lots of going out there, putting myself out there, joining accelerator programs and incubator programs, not because, I mean, you always learn, but mostly because I felt like I needed to expand my network so that I could get in the table and have access to certain people, volunteering for certain roles as well. And that was kind of how I kind of made my way in terms of finding the right people that were able to support me. And so that's why, in terms of the challenges as well, again, the culture shock of when you move as an immigrant, and I can talk as an immigrant entrepreneur, though I'm British now, it's been a journey trying to navigate that. And I think as a woman as well, it's also harder. But you have to keep going and just finding that one person and not taking no as an answer. That's been my experience and journey.
Do you know, Sophia, it wasn't until you just said that I realized that nobody on this panel grew up in this country, which is very strange. But it's funny, because I had a similar experience too when I was trying to build a network in Oxford. And I've been told, you know, I've had great experiences in Oxford, but I was told by people from Oxford who'd lived there forever that it's a really kind of closed community, and it's really hard for outsiders to get in. And my response was always, I'm an outsider the minute I open my mouth, so I think I can handle it. But it is really, I think it is really challenging. I think to get like it's an extra layer to kind of get a seat at the table if you can't relate because you're not from here. Yeah, Matilda, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to say, then my advice would be think about your story. Like, what's that interesting little soundbite that's going to kind of hook people in the beginning? Because if you have that interesting little, every one of us has some interesting part to us, that just think what it is when you've had these hundreds of conversations that you do in all these conferences. I'm sure all of you guys go to all of them. There's lots in London. Think about what that little hook is, how you describe yourself. And then use LinkedIn as well. I think LinkedIn is a really powerful way to build your network, because if you are posting on there once or twice a week, and at best once a day, people will start to follow you, and then there's another big amplification. So that's another one. But for me, the thing that I found a challenge when I started my first business when I was 25, now like 13, 14 years ago, was there wasn't so many women networks, so I couldn't find many peer mentors, and that's what I was looking for. People who were going through the same journey as me, not as male founders, but as female founders, and going through all those journeys around, well, now I've got to, I'm pregnant, now what do I do? How do I take time off? How do I still show the business that they matter? And that whole journey that men just can't go through, I just didn't have. And I think actually didn't really exist so much in London back then. And the last 5 years it's really blossomed, and that's been phenomenal. And now I have a really tight group of women who, we even have dinner parties and things like that. So that's another thing to try and find is peer mentors.
Liana, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with everything said so far, especially that it's no longer what you know, but who you know, and that 1 + 1 = 3, and it's like a mycelium network. You find one person, and then you find 10 others, but also this means a really lonely, raw, and quite isolating journey at times, because it's really exhausting having to network and explain again and again, and going out there, and sometimes it feels like, oh, nothing happened, that was a waste of time, or I shouldn't have done this, I should have done work, or that's time away from my family. And up to recently, I left my job last September. I had a full-time job, and every time I was doing my job, I was just like, Matrix needs me. But then I'm sat at the table with my family, and we have this ritual where we always say what was the worst thing that happened to us and the best, and mine was always related to my startup. They were just like, find somebody else to talk about this. I think it's great to find your voice, and sometimes we find it amongst ourselves, not really your closest people, because they can't actually understand your journey, but people that have been on this path. And there was an interesting question about how you, I think about the seat on the table. Mm-hmm. Predominantly investors that I have spoken to it's really interesting because female founders get like 2% of the overall funding, but even for femtech, which is female-related conditions, and it's not only gynecological care that spans beyond that, it's neurological, it's just the whole body. Just a network. The majority of funding goes towards male founders who innovate in femtech space. That to me is just bonkers. And I often really struggled to begin with when I'm speaking to investors and they're more than one and they're 2 men, and just speaking like, okay, so this device goes in a woman's most private parts. And then I was just like, no, call it by its name. It's the vulva, it's the vagina, it's the vaginal canal. If they're not comfortable with this, then that's their issue. And we just need to, I think it takes time to build yourself. But once you are there, I think it gets easier. But it's definitely, to me, it feels quite lonely at times and raw, and often the grass is greener, or she's doing a startup, and it comes by default as a privileged area, because after I left my role, I didn't have any funding, and I'm completely reliant on my husband, who is very supportive. But it's like, at times I question myself, okay, do I pick up some freelance work, or do I find a full-time job, which will be more reliable? So, it's hard, but hopefully it will be worth it.
Yeah, and this leads us really well onto the next question about fundraising, but I did not know that statistic about femtech, which still surprised me. There's another statistic about grant funding as well, because actually in this country, more women get grant funding than men, which is great, unless it's the big grants. So the big Innovate grants over £100,000 have consistently since 2012 only gone to women founders at a rate of about 4 or 5%. So it's like we're kind of, anyway, in the minority at every turn. So fundraising. Everybody needs money if we're going to start a business. And it's an issue at one time or another for every startup founder. So what has your experience been fundraising as a female founder? Can you talk about any barriers you might have experienced, how you overcame any obstacles, and what advice you have for women raising funds? Where have you in particular had success? So I don't know who wants to start with this.
Okay,
Go ahead, Sophia. Go ahead.
You start with, you go.
Okay, I think, so I've raised a total of $180 million, I think, so kind of.
Congratulations.
Not only me personally. So one thing to note is that I've always had a male co-founder, so that maybe. And sometimes having the female card helps because people now are looking for women to sort of put money into. But certainly, when it's only been me in those pitch rooms, you always get the condescending questions like, "Oh, you're going to be working on that financial thing?" Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, I am. I had once one of the a board member of one of the largest mobile operators in the world I sat with and was telling him about Bima, and he was like, "So Matilda, tell me, how does a young girl like you do something like this?" And and my answer was, I'm the same age as Mark Zuckerberg. And so I'm building something very similar in size, hopefully. And then, another person, we managed to raise some money from another mobile operator, from someone who, from someone who wanted me, from my competence, to go and do a lot of work in a certain market. And then when he was frustrated, turned around and said, well, you only got money from us because you swung your hair around in the face of the chairman. And so you have to sort of, I didn't say anything at that time. I was like 27, so I was sort of like, he's gonna know that was the wrong thing to say. But I went to my co-founder and I said, like, this is kind of out of order, and I think we need to say something. And my co-founder, he said, we can't sort of uproot. They're an investor. So I've definitely had my share of those moments. Even 2 days ago, last week, I was at a conference speaking to a really prominent journalist for one of the most prominent papers here in the UK. And when I told him we were setting up an SPV to raise funds for Carbon Pool and it was going to be separated from and leveraged on it, he sort of was like, you're going to be working on that? You know how to do those kind of things? And those sorts of things you're always having to get over. But I've never felt the way that I see it is the way that people underestimate you is your greatest weapon. So as soon as they realize that you can do those things, then suddenly you're shot up in terms of expectations, and then that helps get through the door. So just make sure you stand your ground, be confident, and keep your competence shining through, and eventually you'll get the money.
That's fantastic advice. And those stories, I've heard them from literally every single female founder I've talked to, and it's in the academic research. This continually happens over and over and over again. So, Sophia, did you have something?
Yeah, I think, fundraising obviously is hard, obviously. So 15 years ago, thereabout, when I started, so I've got like 2 different experiences with fundraising. Back in Nigeria, it was much easier for me because of the circle that I was in, but still incredibly hard because then what you juggle with, or what I was faced with, was a lot of sexual harassment and ridiculous questions. So maybe trigger warning for most people, for anyone. So I remember when I founded I had investors who threw in millions. So money was not an issue for me. Having access to network was not a problem for me. I thrived. I was doing okay. But then you have certain questions such as, So how do you stay motivated and creative? Because my first company was a fashion company, and I don't know if anyone knows what it's like to work in the fashion industry. You kind of get what I'm talking about. And so, I mean, I was quite young then, so I was like, yes, I was a party girl. So it's like, but I didn't get that. And then I remember my friend like giving me an elbow. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I do a lot of weed. I get high a lot. It's like, okay, yeah. And I got the money. Yeah. And that was kind of like a recurring thing. And then because of that, I obviously felt like I had to constantly prove that I was creative by always being high in order to, in order to thrive. But obviously, we'll talk about how that affected me as an entrepreneur and as a leader. But those are kind of like the things as well, or things about obviously sexual assault or all that experience, just because you're trying to raise funds for your business and grow your company. And so though I was doing well on the outside with funds and having people putting a lot of money and millions into my business, there was obviously the other bit of what was going on behind the scenes. And then so when I came to UK, obviously, well, that was different because I didn't have, and maybe because I was more equipped with more experience and knowledge, but that I've still heard women who actually talk about that, but it's something that people don't talk about a lot as well because it may be a taboo to talk about, but it does still happen. But then the challenge for me was the community as well, not being from here and having to find that community and find the people who would believe in the fact that though I wasn't born and bred here and I'm starting a business here, I do have a wealth of experience from years before and I can work. I've run 3 companies. I've had my successes, I've had my failures, but that equips me to do what I'm doing. And that was a challenge. And as a woman of color as well, there is another gate that stops in your way. And that's also something that we also need to address because with fundraising, you're challenged on different aspects. You have people like in the UK, for example, most people might not directly tell you to your face that they're not going to give you funds because of the color of your skin, but they would say it in so many other ways. I mean, some people actually told me that straight up that, well, just because what you're doing is incredible, but just because you look the way you look, you might not get funds. And I had that, this was in UK. So that's sort of, you deal with that and then it makes you wonder what is going on? Why am I even doing what I'm doing? And is it worth it? And then in terms of, the question of what advice in terms of fundraising, I think one thing as well from experience with raising funds and doing stuff is what I see a lot is entrepreneurs often feel like they need to rush to raise funds immediately. And you don't need to. Just because everyone is raising funds and just because you think you need money doesn't mean you need to go and start doing some equity fundraising or whatever it is you need. Your friends and family are your first investors. And if you don't have that, bootstrap, growth hack, figure out a way to make that business work. It's going to be hard work, it's going to be grueling, but do it in a way that you can get your money's worth without having to, you don't need to employ a social media marketer, you don't need to no. Growth hack your way into growing your business because honestly, I feel like a lot of the companies that are failing is because of mismanagement of funds. Because you raise so much money, you don't know what to do with it. And then, okay, your business has flopped. What next? I made those mistakes growing, founding several companies. And now I know that one advice I would give is to check and really see if you really, really need this money. Because often what you do need is opportunity and access into certain networks rather than raising funds. And that's, I would end.
That's fantastic advice, really. And I would just add, how much of your business do you want to give away?
Exactly.
And plus you're spending so much time on the fundraising process. It sucks so much time out of you when you could be actually building. So really, really good advice so far on this panel. Kim, do you have a...
I'll just say, so we're bootstrapped. My business has been running for over 4 years, not because I didn't try to raise money. I actually love what you said, Matilda, because a couple of years ago, we went through full due diligence with an investor in Hong Kong. And they said to me, we're going to give you 1.2 million. on the condition, so I'm a sole founder, they said on the condition that you hire a co-founder, which I can understand from a risk perspective for an organization, but they stipulated that the co-founder must be a man. And their argument was, and this was a woman, mind you, VC saying this to me, said because we work in a male-dominated sector, they believe the organization has the best chance of success if it also has a man at the top. Now, I turned down that investment, which I can't say I haven't regretted a few times, having the money in the bank. But that is the situation that women are often put in. But it was a tough moment because I think in a way of, you said sometimes it makes us stronger. I realized they weren't saying that my business wasn't profitable, that it wasn't scalable, that it wasn't a fantastic opportunity. It was equally tough because they were basically saying that the one thing holding it back was probably the one thing I couldn't change about myself. So I actually didn't pitch to another investor for months because my confidence had been kind of so crushed. But in a way, my number one advice I now say to any founders is make money, don't take money. Because any good business should be generating revenue, all those things. And what I have now found since we've become, so we did get some grant money last year from MasterCard, which was very helpful. But now that we are profitable and generating revenue and we have multi-year contracts with big institutions, I have investors now asking to invest in us. And it's a wonderful scenario to be like, it is my choice now. Do I want to give up? Do we need to scale? And I have an incredible advisory board of people that are actually saying that. They're like, look, Kim, equity might be good to help you scale. You might not need all that. So yeah, my advice, just to reiterate again for anyone, is focus your time and energy on making money, not taking money. And then if you do need to take it, it should come.
Yeah. Well, and you're in a really great position to be able to pick the right money, so to speak. So money from advisors who can help you if you want, in areas that can bring opportunities to you. So that's actually a really great position to be in. Stiliana?
Mine is a bit unorthodox experience, I guess, because my journey to entrepreneurship is very much green still. I was an architect. I very much think as a designer. I'm very creative. And when I finished my second master's in healthcare and design with Imperial, that was in the summer of 2022. And Matrix was just a chapter in my thesis book. But then I decided to apply for this accelerator, which started in September. And between September and December, I really kind of became almost like this chrysalis that was, entered as a caterpillar and left as a butterfly. Not so much because of the platform, but because of the people I was surrounded by. They were like, how can you create something so disruptive and so innovative and not protect it? So I applied for a patent and all these things and started just thinking, how can I protect myself as a founder? And last year was very much like a natural flow. I won a lot of awards, recognitions, an Innovate UK grant, one of the small ones that go to women. And I was part of probably the hardest experience I've had so far. And that was the reason why I decided to leave my job, thinking, okay, now money is here, so I can just focus on this full time. There is a startup competition. I wouldn't shame them because I'm not that kind of person, but it's like the best startup competition in Europe. A pan-European university, top university, cherry pick their startups. And Imperial picked another startup because I was going to Japan with them. I won a competition with them. But there was an opportunity to win a wild card. So I competed for a wild card. I won the wild card. And then I went to the final of the competition where I think around 65 startups were competing for monetary prizes. And I was one of the finalists, final 8. And all the awards went to male-founded businesses from this particular university in Germany called Aachen, where there is lots of tech happening. And the only female award, which was an award of 200,000 euros, went to a female founder, and that was to me. And I was awarded on stage, and it was heavily advertised across social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, you name it, almost like billboards around the world. And then fast forward a month later, I meet the partners of the fund. And I think because the award is subject to due diligence, and due diligence is almost like your last step to getting the money. And there was the longest 20-minute call in my life where I was told by the partner, and by the way, this fund, I wouldn't name them either, but this fund, they invest only in female founders and underrepresented founders. And during the call, they were like, oh, we are very sorry, but we are not going to invest. We are not going to give you the money. And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, first, you're too early, and second, you're doing hardware, so we can't do it. And I was just like, so you actually advertised everywhere that you've been supporting me, and now you're taking this away from me. And that's probably the closest I've come to depression and just feeling like totally wiped. I wasn't myself for a week. I just didn't want to speak to anybody. Called my husband, and I was crying so much, and he was just like, how can you cry for money? And I was like, how can you not? But it's just, this really taught me a lesson how lonely, how hard it is to be a founder, but how much harder it is to be a female founder. Because speaking to my support network, and actually from like people like Kristen, who is doing an accelerator I was part of, and university accelerators, I think you build this, as I mentioned it, as a mycelium network. You build these people around you, and there is an investor who is more of a mentor to me, and she was just like, can't believe it, I'm so disappointed. And I'm Bulgarian, and she's a fellow Bulgarian, and we are very outspoken people. She was just like, why have you not made a public campaign about this? Why don't you go out? They should be blacklisted. The world should know about this. And I was just like, because I can't dwell on this negativity. It's going to eat me. And she was just like, okay, but if you were a man, you would have gotten the money because you would have probably sued them. So I think it's, yeah, that was probably the hardest lesson. And that was the time when I actually thought, okay, I'm going to just really brace myself, take my time and start fundraising. And I've just embarked on the journey, but I'm very slow because I want people who are invested as well as investing. I just don't want money thrown at me. I want people who actually believe in the mission and the ethos and gonna help me make this the best thing it can be. So I think what was said about partnerships, and unfortunately I can't make sales without a physical product, which is a class 2 medical device. But yeah, it's difficult, but not impossible. It makes you.
Yeah, that story, when that happened to you, Stiliana, nearly killed me as well. So I can't imagine. That's so awful that kind of stuff is able to happen. I don't understand how that's possible. But when I was doing research to start Breakthrough Labs, I interviewed tons of female founders and heard all stories, so many stories like this. But a lot of the stories, the negative stories from female founders, started with, well, I was the only woman in the room. So one of the things that I want to talk about is like that feeling of being the only woman in the room. And like I said before, it's so nice to be in a room full of women today. So how do you feel being the only woman in the room? And what kind of cultural shift do you think is necessary to bring about like gender equity in investment? What do you think? And we have an investor panel coming up later today. What would you say to investors? And also, there are a lot of good men out there. There are a lot of good men. What support have you gotten from men along your journey? So any of those kind of questions are okay to be answered in this discussion.
I'll start because I'm an engineer and I'm a mechanical engineer by background. So even from the point of doing my degree, I was one of only 5 women of 220 in my degree. So I've spent most of my career actually being the only woman in the room. And even at the UN in peacekeeping, it's 50% military and 50% civilian. And I have to say, it actually never bothered me. And maybe because I had it from, and even an early age, I played cricket. I think I just always was in environments where I was used to potentially having to prove myself a little more, but also being surrounded by good men. Because I often found, even in cricket, in junior cricket, I'll never forget, the boys on my team were fantastic. It was the opposition or the parents or something that was the problem. And similarly at university, my peers were fantastic. I was one of them, but it was often, the comment from a professor. So I think one thing I will point out, though, we talk a lot about, gender in the room. I think, racial diversity is another one, but age, I think, was something that I found a bigger challenge, being the young person in the room. And equally, I was speaking to one of my board members the other week, and she was incredibly frustrated. She would be in her late 50s, and she works in data. And she said, people think to me, oh, this old person couldn't possibly know anything about data. And so it goes both ways. And so I think, not so much gender, but I think the feeling we often have when, and one of this board member actually said this, she said, as a woman, Kim, she said, you've got the narrowest window of you spend your whole career being too young, then you're the perfect age for a second, and now you're too old. And I was a bit like, what are you meant to do about that, Ava? And she was just like, I don't know, but it sucks. And so I think that I found the harder thing. But in terms of how, and my advice, I think, to investors, I was thinking about this because I thought there's so much now, HR departments in companies and that do such a good job now with all these unbiased practices on hiring. And I don't see why we're not doing the same sometimes. There's so many investors you talk to, and they'll say, oh, well, I'm not biased. And I think, well, if I look at your portfolio, you've never invested in a female fund. I'd probably beg otherwise. And I thought, I don't know why they don't put either just similar screening practices or those simple things, because they're clearly working. I believe they are working in the corporate world in a HR and recruitment sense. So I often just thought, I don't know why investors don't kind of follow a similar kind of screening sense in that way, because the amount of them that tell me, oh, but I'm not biased, and you can just see the kind of women all standing around going, okay, I bet. But yeah, that's my comment on that.
I think I would follow through with that as well, because one of the things that needs to be done, so I was going to just piggyback on what you're saying, is that there needs to be, I mean, I'm actually tired of using the word educating people because, geez, I mean, there's a lot of education out there, but maybe more structures. I was at an event the other day at Bank of England, and one of the women said something. She was like, well, I'm going to kind of like talk. Everyone was talking about educating, and she's like, well, there should be consequences now. So it's kind of like, well, what are you doing about this? And if you are, caught being maybe discriminatory or whatever, there should be consequences after that. Because one thing that I've realized as well, and I'm sure it's probably not shocking, is the fact of parenting, being a mother as an entrepreneur and looking for investment. I know people who would be trying to raise funds, and just because they're pregnant, they literally have to wear like lots of clothes because they're going to meet the investors, and they don't want the investors to know that they are pregnant, because the investors will obviously not invest in the company. I've heard and I've been told about women who the investor will literally tell you to your face, I don't think you're competent or capable of doing this, just simply because you've decided to become a mother. Or even the fact that you're a mother as well is going to give you divided attention, and you're not going to be able to focus on the business. That is ridiculous. And I think that, I mean, we all already know, everyone knows that women, there's the statistics there, it's there, that female-founded companies do better than even male-founded companies when they are given the opportunity. So imagine what happens when you create a platform and an environment that actually is conducive for women with their childcare benefit, in putting in place, things that would help these female entrepreneurs to better help their childcare facilities, whether it's through, putting crutches or whatever, or even helping their team as well. I think that's something that's so important and that investors need to do, as well, I hate the word educating, but educating themselves more, because sometimes some of these people are not actually aware of the fact that they are actually very biased. And then those who actually are not really interested in focusing on the fact that, okay, maybe there's something that I need to do to make sure that we are funding better, then, well, I don't know, there should be some form of consequences. And also, lastly, more female-founded VCs and fund and investors, because I feel like when we do that, that would sort of balance the equation in a way, when we have more female investors than male investors.
That you're going to lead us very well into the investor panel later, so that's perfect, Sophia. Matilda.
Yeah, just maybe taking the other slightly more controversial side of this. I also grew up not realizing when I was the only woman in the room. I would come out of there and someone would be like, oh my God, you were the only girl in there. I was like, I mean, what? I didn't notice that. And I think that helped me not coming in with a sort of apologetic or like a kind of, I'm thinking in Swedish now, which I never do, a sense that you are already subordinate when you walk in the room, because that changes your body language. It changes. You apologize for when you're saying things. Like, go in there and know you're the man, because you are the man, and you're coming in there and you're gonna tell them who's boss, right? And you just always gotta go in with that energy. And I think sometimes people are taken aback by it, but I think that's the way that you help yourself not to come across as, oh, I'm now looking around as the minority and I'm going to act as if I am. I don't know. That's been the thing I think that's helped me.
Yeah, no, I do get that. Before I let you start, I started working at Microsoft at 23 in like one of the techiest parts of the company in Microsoft Research, and it was really only men developers. And so I also kind of didn't really realize, I guess, that I was the only woman in the room until things would happen later on in my career where you get harassed or something is really inappropriate and it catches you really off guard and you don't know how to respond. And I think some of the, as we're discussing, some of these things that happen in the pitches, it's one of the things that we work on in pitch practices is asking like harassing questions to female founders so that it's not the first time that they experience that when they're in the actual pitch and they know how to respond. Otherwise, you tend to kind of laugh it off like it's okay or it's funny, and it's not funny. And so you're right, there is like an element of if you're used to this, fine, but until one of those things happens that you don't expect. Yeah. Stiliana, did you have a...
Yeah, maybe there is a certain bias, and because I come from Bulgaria, my grandmother, she's always been like, quite like, oh, you're a woman, you have to do that, or almost like the default that you have to accept certain things done by women and by men. And when I was 14, I told my parents I want to study architecture. And my mom's reaction was like, oh no, that's a boys' school. You can't go there. It's like just for boys. And actually there is a school in Bulgaria, like a high school, which is for architecture, civil engineering, and geodesy. But my grades weren't high enough for the architecture course. I was admitted in hydro engineering. So my mom was like, no, that's definitely going to be like a boys' experience. But actually in my class, we were 26 teenagers. 16 were boys and 10, so almost like 50-50. But I think it's very interesting what was mentioned earlier about the isms, like not only that you're a certain gender, but like the ageism, the racism, your background, where you come from. I was at this founders, investors, almost like speedy dating, and I was just presenting Matrix with my deck and everything, and there was actually a woman who said, okay, why are you the right person to innovate in this space? You're not a doctor. And then that really triggered me inside, and I was just like, okay, it didn't take a man to go to the moon, to send a man to the moon. But of course, when you've got the lived experience, it's much more powerful, and I think that's why it's really important to work with the direct recipients of your service or product, and that's why I think we often fail by design, because we design in isolation and then just dump things onto people to experience, and they're like committing suicide, or they can't wheel their wheelchair inside their building that's passed all the grades, etc. And I just told her, look, it was until the 1950s women were wiping the floor on their knees and on their hands. But in the 1950s in Spain, a woman decided that enough of that, so she put a stick on the mop, and that's how the mop was born. I was just like, sometimes you don't really need to have a reason or something like this really, really deep story from the past. Sometimes I think great ideas are born almost like in your dreams. With me, it's very much personal experience, like being a mother, childbirth, and actually the first application for Matrix that was researched was actually how it can be a dilation tracker, so it can measure the cervical opening as opposed to the baby's hardness, which at the moment, if you're low risk and you're looked after midwives, which I have been, they put their fingers inside of you when you're in the most severe pain in your life, and it's just awful. Or if you're an obstetrician, you have to open up with a speculum just to see if the baby is descending, although your body tells you something is happening. In terms of being the only woman, I think you just have to be, if you believe in what you do, and if you almost grow this extra layer of just being ready for it. And yeah, it is hard at times. Sometimes it's heartbreaking, especially when you're compared to competitors. And I think that's probably almost like a similar question to one of your previous ones, Kirsten, about. I think we shouldn't look at each other as competitors. I think female founders should look at each other as more like collaborators. Even if you innovate in the same space, there is still Coca-Cola, there is Pepsi, there is Dr. Pepper. So there could be many innovations of the same thing. And competition is good at the end of the day because it just
makes you better.
Apart.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we have 10 minutes left for our last question, which is about leadership, because we're also talking today to women on boards and women that want to be on board. So we want to talk a little bit about leadership. And so how have you found the leadership aspect of being a founder, either in terms of becoming a leader within your organization or a leader in your field, a thought leader in your field, especially if you didn't, as a couple of you, didn't start your career, you started in a field that you didn't actually study in, and that was, you changed fields. So who would like to talk about being a leader?
I think one of the things for me in being a leader has been putting my ego aside, and I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone, because that was kind of like the thing that was for me initially when I started. So when I started running my first company, I was sort of like, I had to prove myself. I had a lot of ego. And it was just from a place of, feeling insecure about what I was doing. But what I have seen for me was surrounding myself with not people who are yes men, people who are smarter than me, and people who would challenge me, people who would call me up, call me out when I'm, going a bit crazy, and people who I can say, I don't know what I'm doing, what do you think? The thing about being a leader is knowing that you don't have all the answers. And so it's okay for you to rely on your team and rely on the people who are probably smarter than you to say, what do we do? Do not have the answer now. I can, or let's take a rain check, let's have a breather, let's think about this. And not being ashamed or feeling like I have failed just because I don't know it. Because I don't know is better than saying, yes, I do, and then going to, screw things up. And I think more importantly for me is something that we don't also talk about a lot, but there's beginning to become some form of awareness on, is the mental wellness aspect. Because while I was going around running 3 different companies and working and having so many other things, I was living with a mental illness that I was not aware of. And that impacted every other thing that I was doing. So I was kind of like a train wreck, just going. And then it was only, I think, a few years back, when I saw the psychiatrist, and he literally just looked at me and like, I don't even know how you're still alive. And that was it. So when I decided to get help mentally, it helped me not just become a better person, but it helped me become a better leader. And it helped me also assess some of the mistakes that I had probably made when I was running my business. I knew that, okay, it makes sense now. Oh, I didn't understand that. Okay, and that's how it does. And it helped me also create a safe space for my team as well, in order to create a successful company and how you function. You need a successful company. A successful company can only thrive when you have, your mental wellness, your mental well-being is in order. And I think that's been it for me.
Yeah, I mean, that idea of self-care is so important. It's like you have to put your mask on first before you put your child's mask on, because you can't care for anybody else in your company if you're not caring for yourself.